right, so thank you. I'm going to just quickly introduce our guest today. So Jennifer Nebesky, who is a longtime leader in the nonprofit space. She has worked with a number of organizations. So currently she is the president and CEO of the Canadian Liver Foundation. She was the prior CMO at Cystic Fibrosis Canada, as well as the interim CEO. And interestingly, she was also had a very successful communications career. So she was an SVP at Maverick Public Relations. She worked also at Mansfield as an SVP, at Thornley Fallis, which is another agency in Toronto, as a vice president. So I think, Jennifer, really interested to hear from you today, your perspectives as someone who has worked in both communications for a dedicated part of your career, and then transitioned into the nonprofit space, which I think is really, really interesting. So maybe to start with, just tell me a little bit about yourself and your current organization and your current role.
Well, thank you very much for having me, Eric. I'm really thrilled to be chatting with you and with your students. Well, currently, as you said, I am president and CEO of Liver Canada. We just rebranded last week. It was part of our recommitment to the liver community and our commitment to liver health in Canada. So we support those living with liver disease or caregivers. We also provide education programs. We advocate for liver health and work with our partners in the liver ecosystem to drive change, support research, and again, continue that really important education element focused on prevention.
That's awesome. And I think, you talk a little bit about support, education, advocacy, research. I'm interested, maybe we'll get into this a little bit later on, but all of those things, right, rely so heavily on communications, which I think is something we can explore in a little more detail. But speaking of communications, maybe you can just touch on kind of your career trajectory and how you kind of started, how you ended up in the nonprofit sector.
We ended up here. Well, much like your students, I took a postgraduate program in corporate communications at Seneca College. And following that, I, did some sort of quick things, whether at Bauer or other organizations, but really kind of jumped into the agency world because to me, that's where there was a lot at that time. Now, keep in mind, this was like the mid 90s. There was a lot of really creative thinking. Agencies, public relations was starting to get its, to build its profile, right? And be invited to the table, not necessarily a seat at the table, but we were invited to the table. And that was a really exciting time. I spent most of my career, especially at Thornley Fallis, working with other organizations that wanted to support the not-for-profit sector, especially in health. And that's where I really found my passion, is how do we communicate authentically the patient's journey, the disease? How do we get people to care? And that kind of propelled me into Cystic Fibrosis Canada, where, so in agency, I was there for almost 20 years. And then I was like, okay, I kind of took stock for a moment and thought, what do I want to do? How do I want to use these PR powers for good in the world? And that's when I saw a posting for the communications and marketing officer at Cystic Fibrosis Canada. I connected with the CEO there, and she was of the same, she inspired me. Her name was Nora Beauchamp at the time, and that's really when I found my place in the marketing communications role, and found that there was a real need for storytelling, and that's something that we kind of talk about in PR a lot. I know that there's all different ways to tell a story, but this kind of authentic storytelling and connecting people to the disease, I understood needed to start with connecting them to the person. And that was really exciting to me, especially at Cystic Fibrosis Canada, because it's a disease that impacts young people. And yet the feedback I was getting was, well, you're my grandparents' organization. Like,
Right.
why are you talking to me? And so I thought immediately, well, here's an opportunity for us to flip the conversation, right? To give voice to these young people and to make it not so heavy. To make it, there's, even to this day, there is I often reference it, there is a uniqueness about someone living with cystic fibrosis that I just immediately was drawn to. And I knew that if we could get that out into the world, if we could get people to understand. And so that experience and going through that sort of shaped my passion. It showed me how to use my skills of what I've learned in communications to help drive that change, to make a difference, make an impact, use our PR tools, powers for good. And then after, oh my gosh, quite some time at CF Canada, I had an opportunity with Canadian Liver Foundation at the time, Liver Canada now, because there was a community of people that were living under heavy, heavy stigmas associated with their disease. They were misunderstood. They weren't encouraged to tell their stories. They were more like hide behind the scenes and don't tell anybody. And that's when I knew, okay, I can come in here and I can take the tools that I've learned at CF Canada and what I learned from there and apply it to this community, because this is another community that needed to sort of come out of the woods, I guess,
Yeah.
and to tell their story, share what was happening, because this liver disease affects millions and millions of Canadians. So really, all of the things that I learned in college and the postgraduate, not just making a plug for it, in this program, those were the tools that I needed to refine, learn more, find out what the tools I was most comfortable with, or how I could adapt them. Those are the ones that really propelled me into what I do now. I think it's wonderful, the evolution of public relations and communications. We're no longer banging at the door to get a seat at the table. We're like, come on in. We need your perspective. It's often a challenge, right? Because it's hard, because our job is to think like 2 steps ahead, right? Like, here's what could happen. Here's what needs to happen. Like, there's the North Star over there. But I find more and more our ability to communicate, speak clearly, use these tools that we've learned, and our abilities to tell these stories is very much needed at the table and welcome. And our what thrills me most is our ability to strategically make an impact in an organization. So it's not just, as they said, what did they say in Bridget Jones? I'm flitting about, with the press release. No. It's so much more than that. And I'm so thankful that the world has caught up to that.
Yeah. It's interesting to hear you talk, because obviously you're someone who's now in kind of this leadership role as the president and CEO, and you've worked in that capacity for some time. But I think from your core, you still sort of consider yourselves a communicator, right? Absolutely. And that's very evident in the way that you talk. But just share a little bit about, communications as a tool, not only for, there's, I'm sure, an individual or individuals that are leading communications at Liver Canada.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but how do you find that, like, even yourself as the CEO, how do you leverage communications on a day-to-day basis to, engage with your team, engage with stakeholders, both internally and externally?
Well, I think it comes right down to what we're kind of taught at the beginning, is communications is essential to getting people to understand the mission, understand the work that we're doing, and communicating clearly is so important. And understanding how to communicate to different audiences is one thing that we are taught, and you realize is, as you progress in your career, so important, like speaking to an audience of volunteers is very different than speaking to an audience of donors, is very different than speaking to my board or speaking to my team. So how I think it's the understanding of how to communicate is in my day-to-day. Also, like writing, you know what I find
Interesting.
just is you can always tell when a communicator has written an email versus, at least for me, like versus
Yeah,
somebody that hasn't, because we're very thoughtful but to the point, right? There's a, and you've probably noticed it even in my emails back and forth to you, right? There's an entry and introduction. There is a, this is what what I'm trying to accomplish. This is what I need you to do, or I need a response about this. Hope you have a nice day. Done. Versus
sure.
somebody, it's just, I think
It's that structured approach. It's
it's a
almost like, and
structured
we teach
approach,
that
right?
that kind of reverse pyramid and the way that we write and
Yes,
the way that we think, and if it comes
yeah.
through in everything that we do, right? Yeah.
Exactly. And now, more importantly than ever, our ability to communicate is not, we don't have a lot of time to do that, right? Everything's down to what we learned, that 10-second soundbite, right? So we as communicators and as your students are learning, are able to really make sure that I hit home. What is that one key thing I want you to take away from this conversation, right? So this conversation could be, half an hour long, but I'm going to keep repeating one key line that I
Yeah.
want you to take away. That 10-second soundbite. I think about how it has now. We are more skilled in as communicators to be on social, right? It's not just jibber jabber. It's, I know I've got 15 seconds in this video to tell you exactly what it is and what I need you to do. And I think that that's also something that we learn in school. And as we go through our careers, we tend to fine tune our ability to do that. I think also I think we're just bragging for comms people. I think that we're approachable. We understand how we have to appear or show up in that conversation, right? It's not, and this is really important in meetings. What I found in my career is like, how do I need to be present at a board meeting versus how do I need to be present and engage with a volunteer? Yeah, these are all skills that I've learned in school and fine-tuned along the way. But working with my comms team, sometimes I think I'm a blessing and a curse for them.
Well, it's an interesting dynamic, certainly, to have someone, I know, like
Yeah.
myself, obviously, a lot of times as someone who
Yes.
works in the communications function, you spend as much time educating and informing your team members as you do
Yes.
actually, executing the work, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's great to have someone at the helm who understands communication, understands how to use it effectively,
Hmm.
and then can also really, give you that guidance and counsel at times as well, which is, I'm
Absolutely.
sure, a benefit that you bring to your team.
Yeah, I think like now communicators or those in the profession like us, that there's an understanding of not only what we do, but the multiple roles we can play within an organization. Because it really, at the sense of like, what do you need a leader to do? I need my leader to communicate effectively, right? To me is internally, but also communicate our mission or what we're trying to achieve externally with multiple audiences. As communicators, we were trained. That's what we come to school for. That's what we do.
Mhm.
And I think that's exciting. Um, yeah, I think that, it's an exciting time.
So I'm curious. I mean, you're someone who worked in, like you said, obviously having 20 years on the agency side,
Yeah.
working, I'm sure, with many for-profit brands,
Yep.
and being in a situation like I just mentioned, where you're spending a lot of time educating and informing your clients and getting them to
Yeah.
buy into the strategies and tactics that you're
Yeah.
pitching them. Do you find that in the nonprofit space, communications is more valued or more understood because it is so inherently intertwined with everything that you do as an organization?
Mm,
Or do you feel like that process of education and informing is still
it's
present
still
in the
there.
nonprofit space?
I was actually really surprised that it wasn't more in the nonprofit space. And in fact, I found that the corporate space, and certainly as agencies, we were all supporting what we were doing, but in the corporate space, it was more ahead of the curve than the not-for-profit space. Now, I will say this, in the last certainly like in the last 5 to 7 years, that has changed. Understanding the value of communication and the power that it has to unite a community behind a cause or raise voices and things, that has certainly come to the forefront. But that was a recent change. When I remember when I started at CF Canada, I thought, wow, like we have to function like a business here, right?
Sure.
This we have to do. So there was a lot of educating the board about what we were trying to do, educating the team. There was resistance because it was change. It was change in a way that we were, communications was now taking a lead position, and talking about like key messages, right? Making sure that it was a united organization, that we all like sort of sung from the same songbook. Like that was all new. So there was some education. There continues to be, because you're bringing in, especially a not-for-profit, you've got people coming in from all different walks of life, different experiences and sectors. So it's still there, but I think there is an understanding that, okay, we need to get on this train, right? Like this is the way that we need to go. So we have enough examples of success stories, I guess, that that we can share. In agency, I just thought, much like not-for-profit, in most cases, you are trying to be as creative and strategic and engaging and smart as possible on a budget.
Yeah, absolutely.
And to me, that was like great training. One of the selling features for me was that, okay, wait a minute, I know I can do this, right? You just tell me, as an organization, how much money do you have? Okay, then it's up to me to figure out what is the best way to use these dollars to reach that North Star, or to achieve what we're trying to get to. I mean, now we have data and we have all of these other things that are informing what we do, and they're fine-tuning what we do. But it's still attached to how we communicate with each other. Yeah, it's exciting time.
Yeah, for sure. And I want to kind of delve into that a little bit more. Obviously, it's interesting to hear you compare and contrast the agency world to the nonprofit space. But I think obviously one commonality is that sort of, you're resource constrained.
Yes.
You're working, I'm sure, with small teams, small budgets. You're limited in what you can do. But communications, of course, is one of the most effective ways to, get a message to your target audience when you compare it to advertising or digital marketing or some of the other pay-to-play, marketing sort of areas. So can you talk a little bit about why communications is valued in the nonprofit organization, and specifically talk a little bit about your team at Liver Canada, maybe even with regards to the rebrand you've gone through, how you've leveraged communications to help, your team educate and inform stakeholders about the work that you're doing on that rebrand front.
Oh, wow. Okay. So
a lot to unpack. Sorry.
Yeah. Sorry. No, I'm like, I wrote a couple of things down. So why comms is valued? I think for some of the reasons that there's just the practical reasons, is that we are more cost effective, right? It's human. It's my, whatever energy I have to put into something. Although it is getting a little difficult with media nowadays, pay to play stuff. But I think it's our ability, again, to tell a story, make it authentic, and it sounds crazy, but kind of real. Like advertising is splash and whatever, but communications, it's more of an authentic exchange with the community member, or with the the person that's listening. how do we let, so with our team, like we use communications in how we speak to government, how we advocate for our liver community and what we do, communication with our volunteers, like how everything from like how do we communicate the a particular event, how do we understand and reflect back to them what their value and the impact that they're making. It's really woven through everything we do. And I think that is the really great change that I referenced before that's happened in the last few years is the understand, and I correct me if I, please step in if I've missed something in your question. I just have comms valued and leverage comms written down.
Yeah.
So I don't know, I feel like it's almost like it's like wired inside. But when I talk to students, because I love connecting with students and working with students, because I love that energy and those ideas that they bring to the table right there. It's all new. And I think that even communicating to your students, and I feel like I'm not doing a great job in this answer, there's a, what am I trying to say? Why is comms valued? I feel, sorry, I feel like I should be doing a really good job at communicating this answer. I think it's valued because it's cost effective. It's valued because it's authentic. It speaks to what we're trying to achieve, I think because it's authentic and it's cost effective, honestly.
Yeah.
But I think that people, we saw that at Cystic Fibrosis Canada, is like all of a sudden we were sharing stories that resonated with people, and not just the cystic fibrosis community. The challenge was put down to how do we get more Canadians to care? And ultimately, my response was, and they needed to take a leap of faith with me, that we need to connect with people before the disease, before we bring that forward. So we all have the same shared experience of dating, of having children, of being a young person, of meeting someone, and like the first parts of a relationship. So these were all pieces that we wanted to authentically communicate. And by doing that, someone, watching a video or reading the story would say, oh, I remember what it was like to fall in love. Oh, I remember seeing, my wife across the room and things like that. Great, I've got you.
Yeah.
Right? With that power of authentically sharing a human story. And then it is, now I hit you with but then she told me she had cystic fibrosis.
Yeah.
And what does that mean? Right? I've already got you in here because I understand the feelings that you're talking about. And now I'm attached to that story. I want to know what happens. And oh my God, how would I feel if that happened? And that's how we started to get Canadians to care. It's completely different from advertising. In a sense, like you said, like advertising goes on a billboard. That's great. That's awareness. That's great. Or it's on, it's on, television after Young and the Restless or something, right? There's a great ad. But it's not connecting the same way. It's not telling the story. It's not encouraging you to do more than go buy a product or to Google a website. I often say that like communications is the Uber to an organization. We go drive around, we pick people up along the way by telling stories, and then we deliver them to the front door of the organization or the website. And it's up to that point, whatever, if they come in through the volunteer channel, a donor channel, or whatever channel that they come into, that they are met with and have the continuation of that story, of that feeling, that what they got there. And that's where comms is kind of how it spreads, or it's important to be part of an organization and everything that it does.
Yeah, I love that. I love that analogy of kind of the Uber. I remember another analogy that we would always talk about on the for-profit side in some of my previous roles was how we really, like, as a comms team, our job is to soften the sort of the groundwork for our sales team, right? By
Exactly.
building
Yeah.
relationships, by telling stories, by kind of, evoking that emotional
Yes,
response from the
exactly.
target audience. And then at
Exactly.
that point you've got them. It's up to
Yeah.
your team then to convert whatever that
Yes,
looks
what
like,
they do
depending
with
on
it.
where you're working.
And hopefully
But
they
that's
listen to us.
such a great analogy. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that's the one I've kind of used throughout my not-for-profit, because it was a lot of educating people on what communications was, public relations, sort of differentiating it. It's not the same as just throwing a commercial up there. So yeah, that and people seem to get it. Now, granted, there's still, it hits at fund development. Fund development's like, well, wait a minute, we've got to say this. But I always kind of revert back to, okay, listen to what marketing or communications is saying and what we're trying to do. That's actually trying to drive people to you, and they need that same experience, right? You've caught them in that, right?
Yeah.
They bought into that, not bought in, but you know what I mean. So continue that conversation, and let us help you, because at Liver Canada, communications is the last stop before anything leaves the organization. It's the first stop and the last stop before something leaves the organization, whether it's internal or external. Meaning that communications is at the table when we're discussing something, like something that I'm trying to think that's not comms focused, like fund development or volunteer engagement. Well, obviously communications has a lot to say about how to engage a volunteer. They're on the pulse of what's happening outside. They're hearing about what the chatter is online and what's coming into us. And they're very strategically focused. So ensuring that they are at the beginning of the conversation to provide some directions, some strategy, that they understand what their job is in this, mission to, engage more volunteers, get more volunteers at Liver Canada. They understand what sort of events are happening to make that happen. And then on the way out, so all the different teams have touched it, but before it goes, and even as a CEO, I constantly bounce stuff over to them. But they check it again. Are the messages in there? Is this going to engage volunteers? Is this what we want volunteers to understand, see, and hear? Yeah, that's why when you think about public relations now, it's not just in a box or in an office writing a news release or writing a CEO news, speech and things like that. That's still very important, and it's very much a part of it. But whatever's in that CEO speech, whatever's in that news release, needs to be echoed throughout the organization.
Yeah,
Right?
I mean, it sounds so intuitive, but I feel like at so many organizations, that's just not how things are done, right? Where comms isn't brought in at the beginning, and they're not there to help set the objectives, and then again to kind of pressure test them before you actually execute, right? Like, is this actually what you set out to do? Are you going to be launching a campaign that is going to reach your objectives, which is kind of the way that we think, right? As
exactly. As comms, we're wired that way to be like, okay, not only what is the call to action, how am I measuring success of this?
Yeah.
Right. Like the way that we roll out a comms plan is like, what are my objectives? What is the strategy? How are the logistics? What is the timeline to make sure this all rolls out? I'm often flabbergasted, dumbfounded, whatever, like how many people don't follow this process. And I'm like, but it would make your life easier as a finance person, as a, whatever, fund development, whatever, a mission person. So integrating that and making sure that we work that way at Liver Canada has been really vital, especially as we've gone through not like a pandemic, right? Where people with liver disease were already feeling isolated. They were already like, I remember one of the first conversations I had with a daughter. She was a young woman, probably the same age as your students. And she said that her father had died of liver disease, and he didn't want anyone to know. So they weren't allowed to talk about it. They weren't allowed, like, no. And I thought, my God, how awful. Like, how this is, yeah. Again, and she was a communications person, actually. So that was even a struggle for her there.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's yeah, I don't know. Sorry, I got off on a
Well, and
tangent
that's interesting.
there,
I think, like, and it goes to another topic that I wanted to explore, which I think is interesting, which is, when I think about liver disease, when I think about cystic fibrosis, these are invisible illnesses, I think,
yeah,
right? In a lot of
yeah,
ways.
totally.
And obviously, as nonprofits, one of the things that you are doing is you are empowering patient populations, in this case, to sort of be your spokespeople and be your advocates and be the sort of, brand,
Yeah, absolutely.
brand, sort
Who
of,
better to talk about it?
advocates for your mission. So was there things that you learned when it comes to, dealing with sort of that invisible illness population at CF Canada that you continue to leverage today at
Absolutely.
Liver Canada?
I think it's, yeah, absolutely. Because I think even with cystic fibrosis, to a certain point, I think cystic fibrosis, it just wasn't on people's radar. I remember doing that segment with Jeremy Saunders, going out on the street, just asking people, hey, do you know what CF is? They're like, Canadian Forces? I don't know, cancer or something. So it's just, yeah, part of education. So I knew that coming in, and I knew that we had to find a few key people, and it had to start with us internally, coming out and proudly saying, hey, we're the voice of those living with liver disease. And these are millions of people. There are 100 different liver diseases. You can't live without your liver. So let's have some honest conversation. So we had to create a safe space. We started, so I started in 2020, just before the pandemic started.
Oh, wow.
And so we knew that there were people that were isolated and already not talking. So we needed to create a safe space for them to ask some questions, to reach out to us. And that's when we started a Just Ask campaign. And it was all around breaking down the stigma. We don't care, right? Like, doesn't matter to us. Just ask, right? We're here to help. And we needed to first put that message out. And that campaign has successfully gone every single year and gotten bigger and bigger and bigger, which is wonderful. So we knew we needed to do that. So it was a similar kind of thing to CF Canada. We needed to educate Canadians. We needed to let them in, right? Reflect back to the community of people with liver disease, communicate back to them that come talk to us. This is a good place, and we got answers for you, and we've got supports for you, and maybe you haven't checked us out in a while. So we sort of bring them in through that way. And then slowly we've started to demonstrate that we are a trusted voice, you can share with us your stories. And we really encourage people to share their stories with us. And at the end, if you're not comfortable, that's okay. But at least you've had an opportunity to communicate how you're feeling and what's going on, because that will influence how we do our work, whether it's out there publicly or not. But the wonderful news is that people are starting to share their stories. Because again, there's millions and millions of people living with liver disease in Canada, which was very different to cystic fibrosis, right? There were like 2,400 CFers, and there's millions and millions of Canadians with liver disease, and yet the similar issues. Yeah. And that I would say I credit to communications, full stop. Like, that is the power of communicating effectively and authentically and transparently and all of those things. And I think that was really, just like at cystic fibrosis, when we started down that road of sharing stories, it really demonstrated the power of storytelling, and to bring people into an organization, but also lift off their burden of stigma.
Sure.
Which was really,
and starting
really
to kind of
exciting.
build those relationships and again empower them to be their own storytellers,
advocates,
right? And share their experience. Yeah.
So when people come and share their stories, that's one of the things we ask them immediately. And one of the things that we asked when people would respond to a Just Ask campaign or any campaign is, Are you interested in sharing your story? Do you want to be part of this movement that is coming out? So whether we're talking to them and they're coming with us on government relations opportunities, right, to speak to members of parliament or things, whether they're supporting us and putting an event together or somewhere in between, the core of what we communicate is the same. It's just the training that we provide and the supports that we provide are vary.
Mm-hmm.
But you need people to take up your torch or whatever you want to call it, and you need them to help you tell the story, because otherwise it's me, and people might look at me or one of my colleagues and be like, yeah, but what do you know about liver
Yeah,
disease?
absolutely. And I think like the authenticity and the sort of the power of that personal experience is what you need, right? When you're sitting
Yeah.
in the room with a government official, or when you are trying to put together a social media video that shares or sort
Mm-hmm.
of gives the target audience a feel for what it's like to live with a rare illness or liver
Yeah.
disease. You can do that as a brand, but if you have an individual that can share their own personal
Oh,
perspective, it's so much more valuable.
absolutely, hands down,
Yeah.
100%. And as
Yeah.
a communicator, getting that opportunity, which other people in your organization may not, and I'm thinking about corporate organizations and things like that, because a not-for-profit, we kind of all tend to, but being the keeper of those stories and getting the opportunity to hear firsthand those stories and being able to shape them, meaning not change them, but like shape them so that they can go out in the world, like you said, whether they're a 15-second sound bite or video or story. That gives us insight that no other department has
Mm-hmm.
into what, into the disease in this case, or into what your community is trying to accomplish or how they feel. And I think that also puts communicators at an advantage in the world.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. You mentioned the rebrand. Do you want to just talk
Yeah,
about like was the rebrand an effort to sort of again deepen relationships with some of those
yeah.
stakeholders? Talk a little bit about why and what that's looked like with your
Oh,
team. Obviously, it's only been a week, but I'm sure that you're deeply
it's
immersed in
been a
that
busy
on a
week.
day-to-day. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very exciting. So Canadian Liver Foundation has been around for over 50 years, but and it was doing work behind the scenes, and it has a long history of supporting research and doing things like that. But what wasn't happening was it wasn't engaging with Canadians or those living with liver disease as much as it really urgently needed to or needs to. There is this, as I say, a tsunami of liver disease coming to Canada. Like the numbers have gone from 1 in 10 to 1 in 4, and they are increasingly rising. So we needed to refresh the brand and really kind of turn it on its head to engage more Canadians, look more open, more like, and this was all from feedback, as your students will know, like feedback that you collect over time and you're over surveys and interviews and things like that, is like, how can we best show up for you? Um, and it really was apparent that we just had to flip. If can, we needed to make sure as an organization that not only people with liver disease are seen and heard, but there were supports in place that we were able to take care of people now. But prevention, those numbers coming by like 2030, 2040 are huge. And we needed to sort of raise the alarm bells and get people engaged. And we knew that to do that, we needed to have a brand that reflected openness, energy, that that talked about living a healthy liver lifestyle, right? Like we needed to be able, because there are 100 different liver diseases, some genetic, some lifestyle related, um, some rare diseases. We needed to be able to communicate all that and bring people in. And so that was why we sort of refreshed not just the look and feel, but we recommitted to the liver community. That was kind of the signal of this change. This is our recommitment. Like pardon me, we're putting the gauntlet on the ground. This is what we're here. This is what we're going to do. This is our mission. Help us, join us. We're going to advocate. We're going to do a lot, but it's on us, and we take the responsibility very seriously to raise as much awareness, educate, and advocate for those living with liver disease, but also the future. There's 240,000 children now with liver disease, and that's the first time. Like that's shocking.
Yeah.
So there's a lot to do. The response to the rebrand has been so positive, not just internally. I do want to credit the comms team, led by Holly. It's did a phenomenal job. Like really took into consideration all the feedback, all the interviews, everything that we did, and everything that we want to be, and created that brand. I'm really impressed, and I'm really happy that the Canadians have responded so positively. It's hard. As I'm sure you know, it's very hard to get media coverage that you don't pay for nowadays. Gone are the days where like both you and I, right? We would sit there, you'd send out all of your pitches in 7 o'clock or earlier in the morning, and schedule all of the interviews. That doesn't happen nowadays. So the fact that we were able to get some media coverage was very exciting. And March is Liver Month, so there'll be even more fun things happening. But yeah, we needed, like I said at the beginning, we needed to make sure that we were an organization that reflected our community and very clearly communicated what its North Star was, and that's to keep Canadians out of the hospital.
That's great. Well, I mean, congratulations. It's such a big effort. I know we at Meridian, where I work, totally different industry, but we've just recently gone through a big rebrand over the last year, and I can attest to how much effort and energy and money goes into it. Is such a huge undertaking. So congratulations. It's been great to see some of those media articles like you mentioned, and I'm glad to hear that your stakeholders are sort of, are positively responding, which is awesome. The other question I was going to ask you just about the nonprofit sector in general, and I'm just mindful of our time, but it's such a competitive space, right? Like, I mean, there are so many nonprofits out there competing for dollars, competing for donors at a time when we're dealing with kind of a tumultuous economic backdrop across Canada, right? So can you talk a little bit about some of the challenges of that and maybe how the rebrand is hoping to, separate you from some of your competition as a nonprofit?
Oh, for sure. So absolutely. The challenge for a nonprofit is always, how do you do so much for so little, right? These are donor dollars, right, that you are entrusted with to do the best for the community. So that in itself has always been a challenge, but considering the current economic climate, how we're all feeling a little uncertain, we're very aware of and pay attention to the trends or surveys, things like that come out about Canadian attitudes and donor fatigue and things like that. So we know or understood how Canadians were feeling and kind of what was coming. So if we were going to make a change, if we were going to yell from the rooftops, we needed to really make a change, and that meant changing the name, changing the look and feel of the organization to engage as many Canadians as possible. Now, we as health charities, it's a remarkable industry. There are some phenomenal leaders and team members across the sector, and we all work together because we know that there's a power in a collective. So we work under the Health Charities Coalition of Canada, and there are, I think, 33 of us, national health organizations. They really work on driving change from policy to ensure that, what we say is, a patient at the table. All policies, health policy. Any policy, whether it's housing, transportation, it impacts the health of Canadians, but also, the people that our organizations support. So as a collective, there is a great camaraderie amongst us. For sure, we're all competing for dollars, I guess, but dollars in our disease in our sector. So as I will say, like as corporations and government sort of trim their budgets, we're the first ones to get hit.
Sure.
And a lot of what we do, certainly at Liver, is we have like very, very like minuscule, if at all, government funding year to year. And I think that as a collective, raising that voice that like, if we don't exist, right, if you wipe us out, because that literally is like, we're constantly balancing on that knife, right? Which also makes communications fun. If you pull us out, if we don't exist anymore, like there's more people in hospitals, there's more people putting time and pressure on doctors, nurse practitioners, nurses. There's less people advocating for the patient and for change and for research funding. This whole piece disappears. And that impact on Canadians will be felt. But unfortunately, what my concern is, it will be felt later. So I think part of our role as leaders is to communicate that. And
that opportunity cost, or that unseen cost, right? That most people don't think of. Yeah.
Exactly. So there are we competitors? Well, we got to break above the noise of each other. But I think more than anything, I am so impressed. And I remember like being dumbfounded by this, quite frankly, when I was at Cystic Fibrosis Canada. I was like, wait a minute, we're all working together here.
Yeah,
right?
That's
like
an
we're all
interesting concept.
and like as an industry, like you don't, like I'm sure you don't see that at like Meridian or other corporations, and even in agency, right? We were all right.
You're
We were all wired to
hyper-competitive,
compete. We were all hyper competitive, right? Who's
Yeah.
going into that pitch and who's coming out of it and whatever. So is it hard? Oh, I'm about to lose you. 100% it's hard. But it's a great challenge, and it's a very rewarding challenge. I remember when I took the job at Cystic Fibrosis Canada, and one of my colleagues in agency said to me, "Are you sure? Like that's slow, man. Like those are ladies in cat sweaters," is what I was told.
Wow.
And it's not the case. That's not. There are some of the most brilliant, creative minds in this industry, and we need to continue to speak about that and encourage people to join us, because it's rewarding. It's especially as a communicator, you can really see, and you have the ability to use your tools, right, for good, and to really see that direct impact of your change. Especially as a young communicator, like you want to try some stuff, you come to a not-for-profit, show us what you got. Like, we'll arm you with the tools you need.
I'm curious. So I know, do you have a hard stop at one?
No, I'm good.
So it's okay if we go 1 or 2 minutes over. I have 2 more questions that I kind of wanted to delve into, and you sort of just touched on that one there. But I wanted to get your advice for students who are, they're maybe 8 months or a year away from graduating. They're obviously thinking about where they're going to land, how they're going to get into the industry. You're someone who, just like me, spent a good number of years on the agency side. And I know in my own personal experience, I always advocate that students look at agency opportunities because they're so diverse. You get such a good,
for sure,
education into all aspects of comms, right? But I mean, I'm curious what your perspective is, what your recommendations would be, and if the nonprofit space offers some of those same opportunities that maybe an agency environment would, in terms of communicators starting off their careers.
Oh, okay. So you and I are the same. Even when I taught corporate communications at Seneca, like a media relations course, I said, I always emphasize, and even when I talk to students now, agencies are really, you learn to be nimble, but you learn to be creative. You can use like ideas are gold, right? So really challenges your thinking, makes you think, like you've got to do it relatively quickly sometimes, right? But you've got to use all those tools. So I always encourage agencies, no, full stop. Not for profit is a very similar environment in a sense. Like we are always looking for ideas to connect, to communicate. What is the latest, not necessarily the latest and greatest, but help us understand where is our audience, whether that's patients, advocates, whoever, where is our audience and how do we meet them where they're at? How do we communicate to them? What are the unique ways we can engage them? And then you can also try, is it communication for government relations? Is it communications around fund development? Do you want to drive an impact that way? Are you communicating like more corporate communications, right? Or you want to be in the office of the CEO and financial? Like there's all of these departments and areas of opportunity, especially now as, public relations, communications is at the table that we can explore. So, and it's just, advocating for the not-for-profit sector. We are so hungry for smart thinkers. I mean, this generation that's going through your program and others are, they understand data. They understand, like, there's already that built-in knowledge that they have. And I have hired five people out of communications school. Just because their energy, their creative thinking, and their attention to detail, because no matter what, that doesn't go away. Is that a full sentence? Is it written properly? Is that kind of thing is drilled in, like, so was it to me? It was drilled into me, right?
Yeah.
Like
yeah.
The teacher wouldn't even sorry, there was a typo in that. I'm not even finishing looking at it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, that's not formatted correctly. Not looking at it. So it really did. It's such great training. The corporate communications, it's communication. It's such good training. That I really, those are the two areas. Asked me 10 years ago, I would have said agency, agency, agency. Now, having been on a not-profit side for 10 years, yeah, definitely. There's opportunities in both. And
yeah.
And it's fun. We're not ladies in cat sweaters.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean I think the industry has changed, and it's really now seen as being a great opportunity for people who are creative, who are ambitious. They want to do good work, but they also want to connect it to some sense of purpose, right? And they want to feel like they are making a difference in their day-to-day roles.
And I think and I had the privilege to work with organizations that were supporting not-for-profit when I was an agency, and I would work firsthand with the not-for-profits. So I kind of had the privilege of kind of doing both, or understanding not-for-profit and what was possible there. But you're right. Creativity, impact, making a difference in the work that we do is so important. I remember saying to my team, we spend more time together than I do with my family. Yeah. So we've got to make this meaningful and impactful, right? There's got to be a purpose to what we're doing. And if we can use these tools, if we can be creative, and most importantly, have fun while you're doing it, it'll be a great career. Yeah.
That's great. That's great.
I love it.
That's fantastic. And the last question I wanted to ask you, and again, this is something I'm sure that anyone looking for that first opportunity, or maybe even for a new opportunity, would be interested in. I talk with students all the time about the importance of networking, relationship building, kind of, making sure that you're nurturing your network. So even once you've got an opportunity, to continue to sort of, connect with people, reach out, have conversations, have a coffee, whatever the case may be.
Absolutely.
Can you just give a little bit of advice to anyone that is in that position where they're looking for that first role? What should they be thinking about? What should they be focusing on in the months leading up to their graduation, for example?
Oh, sure. I guess there's a couple of things. I think yeah, it's really important to network. And I remember feeling very intimidated by that. Like, what does networking mean? And then I don't know if I'm necessarily good at small talk and that kind of thing. But it's about making connections with people, and so I think that that's really important. And it's sort of having, you don't necessarily have to have 100 different people that you speak to and connect with, but 3 or 4 people who like have that meaningful conversation. Ask to be a mentor. Like, I am interested in this. Will you like be my mentor, or will you help guide me through here? Absolutely. Someone once said to me, no one will turn down the ability to talk about themselves.
Yeah.
So go and ask.
Yeah.
And it's so, you know what? It's so true. It's so true. So I think that that's really important. Spend some time, like, so talk to people in different sectors, right? Like, if you're interested in agency, then talk to some. I personally always loved the sort of small, mid-size, privately owned, or Canadian-owned agencies. Like, that's where I wanted to put I had lots of I had conversations with people in sort of bigger ones and stuff. But to me, I was like, that's where I saw the ability to really use my skills and be able to jump into anything, right? So I encourage students to do that, like speak to them in different industries and different levels of industry, and just reach out. I don't think it has to be that intense. Like, just make the first contact, right? Hi, this is who I am. This is what I'm studying. I'm really interested in your sector. You've popped up on my radar. Do you have, 20 minutes to have a virtual chat or a coffee with me? I mean, the virtual chat has really opened up all kinds of possibilities. So you can meet with someone that lives in the Yukon if you want.
Yeah.
So that's wonderful. But let's be honest, like, we've all been, or at least what we're all feeling on the side is that we've all been on Zoom and Teams and all this stuff for so long that if you're in my area, I'm going to meet you for coffee.
Yeah, just as an excuse to see somebody in the flesh.
See a three-dimensional person. So definitely do that. Do your research, because I think that there's a lot of opportunity for comms people graduating now. But it's really up to you to decide like where you want to use those tools. A volunteer. Can I just say volunteer?
Yeah.
I wish I had known this or had thought about this when I was up and coming. Volunteer for an organization. Listen, we don't just look for volunteers that can execute an event or, show up and, knock on whatever. Volunteer to use your listen, I'm a student and I've got some time. I want to connect with your comms department. How can I help? The comms departments are, as you know, small and stretched. Mm-hmm. So any good opportunity to volunteer or even do some research for an organ, do that. It gets your name in the door. Listen, if you're already like involved in our organization, then it's a little bit easier to take that next step. I think also it's that you can't get experience without experience kind of thing, but you that vicious cycle. Again, I think volunteering is a good way to get around that. And I appreciate that people's time are stretched and it's difficult. So it's not a big chunk of time. Like, if you just say, listen, I have like 10 hours over the course of the month, what can I do to help you and still like build my resume, make sure that I continue to learn? Reach out. Absolutely. Connect with people. Don't be shy, but also don't feel neglected if someone doesn't get back to you right away. Again, it's a very busy world right now. But yeah, the intent is there. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. No, I love that. It's the same advice that I tend to give, which is, it's like sales in the sense that you might have to
Yeah.
reach out to 10 people to get one yes.
Yeah, so
And the
true.
volunteering thing is so important. And I agree. I think at the end of the day, it's an investment in yourself. It's an investment in your future. And as you
Absolutely.
said, it really does pay dividends in the end, right? So
Yeah, it
great,
does.
great advice.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, I'll leave it there. Thank you so much for your time. I know you're super busy and you've got a million things going on, especially this week with the rebrand and everything. So thank you for sharing your insights and your experience. I really, really appreciate it. Is there anything else you wanted to cover that we didn't touch on?
No, I would encourage, well, I'll just make a plug for liver.ca, of course.
Sure.
I wouldn't be a good comms person if I didn't. There's great ways to get involved, but also get support and help for people that you love. I say this not knowing what's going to happen, but I encourage people to reach out if you have some questions. I mean, not knowing what's going to happen if I'm going to get 3 or 303 emails, but you can always reach out to me. I'm always happy to chat.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm sure that there will be many students who take you up on that offer. So appreciate that. Thank you.
Anytime. Thank you. It's
Yeah.
been so nice
Great.
to see you, Eric.
Yeah, and it's been great to catch up as well. Again, I really appreciate you taking the time to do this. So thank you so much. And yeah, I'm going to leave it there.